What's up, YouTube? Now, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, has this Negro lost his mind? If you read the title in its entirety, I know you're probably like, what is this dude talking about? What is this dude talking about? Or have you been captured? No, that's not what's going on. That's not what's going on. Let me explain. So you see the title, right? Yes, the white man is the most hated. And I know once again you're confused. But look, let me explain. I don't know if you guys have seen recently this whole Jeremy Carl situation at I guess the little Senate hearing where Jeremy Carl um was he was up there. I guess the little how they do their little what would you call it? You would call it the in order for someone to get inducted or whatever, they do the survey of them or whatnot and whatnot. And they're having a little conversation up there in the Senate here, and he's talking to some Democrats and whatnot, a lot of people in the political parties, and he's trying to spew his white nationalist bullshit. If you don't know who Jeremy Carl is, he's a white nationalist, and he has some books basically trying to push the whole white victimhood narrative, that white people are under attack, and there's anti-white racism, anti-white male, and all this other goofiness. White males are being discriminated against in the job market, and all this stuff, right? So he's up there spewing that stuff, and they're completely just debunking this shit. And the funny thing is, they didn't even go as hard as they should have, but they debunked his shit down to the T. It was embarrassing. The dude could barely even articulate what he was trying to say, and that's because he couldn't scream the N-word and shit. That's how a lot of them dudes are. So he couldn't really articulate the shit, because when they get out of their echo chambers, then they can't really explain their narrative because their worldview isn't cemented in facts. So they debunked his goofiness, right? All this shit is theater anyway, but they debunked his goofiness. And I was sitting back and I was thinking, these guys are sitting up here. You got all the white nationalists and shit on X, of course. They're like, yeah, man, yeah, he's spitting the truth, and even though he could barely articulate what he was saying and explain his position, it's not rooted in any statistical facts or anything. But they still, of course, they're gonna bust nuts on the screen saying that he was spitting facts. And he was up there talking about, there's anti-white racism, and you got all the goofies, the white nationalists. Yeah, anti-white racism out here. There's anti-white male hatred and this and that. And I was really thinking to myself. I was like, you know what? These guys are right. Once again, I know you're probably like, what are you talking about? Well, they're right. Because I really started to think, right? Because I saw a video soon after that on a famous slave abolitionist known as John Brown. And, someone was talking about John Brown. They were like, yeah, this is a positive figure in white American history that needs to be talked about more. And he's not really given his flowers enough and this and that. And I was thinking, I was like, you know what? Yeah, the white nationalists are right. There is anti-white male hatred. Yes, the white man is the most hated. Because when you really look at it, people like John Brown and other slave abolitionists, they don't get the flowers they deserve. Because see, when we're talking about a white man, someone who gets the title of a man, regardless of race, but we're talking about a white man, John Brown is the perfect example of what a man is. John Brown was a slave abolitionist who stood up for righteousness, who stood up for justice, who stood up for truth. And he was willing to crash out behind that. And that's what he did. You know, look in the history of John Brown. He did very great things in standing up for righteousness, standing up for truth, standing up for justice. And he does not receive the flowers that he deserves in the historical record. He is a barely mentioned. You know, he's a barely mentioned. I barely even knew about him in high school, which I'm not that far removed from high school. I'm in college right now, you know. But I remember, I think it was either my freshman or sophomore year. I remember we were in history class learning about slavery and all this stuff, right? And we briefly went over John Brown. I mean, it was like probably 2 minutes they mentioned him, and then we just kept going. And then, you know, we're talking more about Confederate soldiers and what they doing and shit, you know, but we barely talking about dudes like John Brown. He only gets 2 minutes in the classroom, only 2 minutes, and a small little footnote in our little history book, our social studies, you know, history book. Just a small little area, just a small footnote at the bottom of the page, bro. Barely gets any flowers, bro. Just he's treated as if he's insignificant. And I was thinking, like, damn, all the history you look into, you see all the great things this man did, and he barely gets any flowers. He barely gets any mention. We just gloss over him. But a lot of people don't even know he exists. But we know who many Confederate soldiers are. We know who many of these individuals are. We know who they are. We look into them who are fighting to uphold wickedness and racism, but we barely know about these slave abolitionists. We barely know about a John Brown. We barely know about a Thaddeus Stevens. We barely know about a Cassius Clay. We don't learn about these individuals. There's more statues of Confederate soldiers than there are slave abolitionists. So I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, these dudes, these white nationalists, they say there's anti-white male hatred. And I was thinking, I'm like, these white nationalists, these guys, to me, they're not men. They're not. I mean, by definition, they're really not men if we really want to go there. That's a whole nother video. They're not men. They're boys. They're white boys. They're bitches. They're not men, right? So, but when we look at what a man is and who actually gives off the aura of what a man would be, it would be someone like a John Brown. It would be someone like a Thaddeus Stevens. It would be someone like a Cassius Clay. But these men are barely given their flowers compared to Confederate soldiers, racists through the historical record. They are not given the same respect as a lot of these other degenerates within white American history. There are more Confederate statues than there are statues of slave abolitionists. This is a fact. There are more statues of people who are trying to uphold slavery than people who were trying to fight against it. So white Americans do not revere the righteous of their history. They do not uphold the righteous individuals in the historical record. They revere the wicked. And even the statues that are up of slave abolitionists, we know that those statues were erected begrudgingly. We know they did not want to erect them statues. They were, as those statues were likely being erected in many cases, they were like, rolling their eyes. Okay, nigga, we'll erect the statue of a slave abolitionist. Okay, Negro. They was not trying to erect them statues. But we know that the Confederate soldier statues were erected with smiles. We know the Confederate soldier statues were erected with joy. We know this. So when the white nationalist says the Jeremy Carls and all these other clowns say the white man is the most hated, they're right. They're right. Because John Brown, who's a white man, or what a real man represents, not these bitch ass white boys running around on X, your Legion of Men's and shit like that. Those are white boys. They're bitches. They're cowards. But white men like John Brown are hated. White men like Thaddeus Stevens are hated. White men like Cassius Clay are hated. And the litany of other white men who have stood up for righteousness in this country during slavery, during Jim Crow, who got deleted behind standing up for righteousness. They are barely given respect. They are despised by the majority of their people. They are not given the flowers they deserve in the historical record. So yes, the white nationalists are right. The white man is the most hated because the what a white man really is, which is someone who exudes masculinity like a John Brown, like a Thaddeus Stevens, like a Cassius Clay, they are despised. They are despised by their own people. I would say even probably more than black people, because they despise N-word lovers to the core. That's what they would call them, N-word lovers. And those N-word lovers during Jim Crow and during slavery, they were done the same way that black people were done, maybe even worse. They were also suspended from trees for standing up for righteousness and truth by a bunch of cannon fodder, weak ass whites doing the bidding of the elites to their own demise. And even now, America is falling because these lesser whites, these low IQ whites that swear they so smart and all this, they are bringing this country down with their wickedness, with their hatred and wickedness. Right now, as I'm recording this video, there's likely one of these white boys and other goofy racist white females along with them on a panel talking about the blacks, disparaging the blacks. That's all they do. But white men who are standing up for righteousness, like a John Brown, a Thaddeus Stevens, a Cassius Clay, they are despised in their community. They are the most hated in their community. So yes, the white man is the most hated. But we got to be specific what a white man is. It's not one of these white national. It's not a white man is not a legion of men. I've talked about it on the show. Y'all know who that is. The goofy legion of men. That's not a white man. That's a white boy. A white man is not Jared Taylor. That's a white boy. A white man is not John Menadeo. That's a white boy. None of these individuals are white men. Jeremy Carl is not a white man. That's a white boy. You get where I'm getting at? Those are not men. They're boys. But white men like John Brown, Thaddeus Stevens, Cassius Clay, and others, they're the most hated in their community. So yes, once again, yes, the white man is the most hated. That's all I gotta say for this video, man. I'm out.